Hello all, and welcome to this edition of Compliance Corner webinar from Landmark Estate Agent Services, the AML Back to Basics and the Health Check. Myself, Simon Burney, the Sales Director, and Stephen Sanachet, the Head of Customer Success, on the call with you today. Hope you enjoy this session. We don't expect it to last much longer than 20 minutes. We'll try and keep it kind of brief and as informative as possible. But if you do have any questions, our details are on the last slide. Please come back to us. For anyone who has accepted the invite or asked to be invited to this session will also receive a recording of it as well, so yourself and your team members can watch it back at your free will. Anyway, without further ado, let's move into the session. So the agenda today consists of 8 key areas: registration with HMRC, why it's important and what you have to do, your key responsibilities, AML policy and business risk, customer due diligence, or CDD for short, suspicious activity reporting, which is also an acronym of the SAR, suspicious activity reporting, record keeping and why it's so important, the penalties for non-compliance, which are currently a very hot topic, some fines that have gone out, an AML health check, and how we can help you with this. First of all, registration with HMRC. This is one of the key tenets to what you as an estate agent have to do. Every single business has to be registered with HMRC. In fact, it's such a hot topic that only recently in the news you may have noticed the stories around the latest estate agent fines that were issued. Over 194 agents were fined, and way over 90% of them were fined due to non-registration with HMRC. And that the total's valued over £1 million. It's really quite a quick process, and one that you have to renew annually, and you will be sent reminders by HMRC a couple of weeks before you need to renew and a couple of days before you need to renew. But in effect, the process determines whether your eligibility, i.e. should you be registering with HMRC. It runs a fit and proper persons tests on the main owners of the business, and then it allows you to provide the necessary documentation to complete the registration process. It shouldn't take too long, but it absolutely needs to be done, and it needs to be renewed on an annual basis. So you have to make sure, I can't state it any clearer, you have to make sure you do this, and you have to make sure you renew your registration with HMRC. So when we look at you as a business, you have to look at the senior management key responsibilities. So, and this is whether you're a small business or a large business, it kind of doesn't matter, but there are certain levels that the bigger business you go up in, there's a few more nuances. But ultimately, you have to appoint a money laundering reporting officer. Now, if you're a smaller business, let's say a 1, 2, 3 branch business, it might just be the owner of the business who's the reporting officer. In a larger setup, again, it's probably one of the directors that's going to have direct responsibility as being the money laundering reporting officer. And in those larger setups, you may also have deputies or nominated officers to carry out the day-to-day duties involved. But ultimately, you need to have an appointed money laundering reporting officer. You need to ensure the AML policies and procedures are in place, and we'll come on to a bit more detail around that later in the process. And these need to be documented. Everything we talk about here needs to be documented. And also, you need to provide staff training, and that doesn't matter whether you're a 1 branch estate agent or 100 or 1,000 branch estate agents. Staff training needs to be provided, and it needs to be documented. Ultimately, you always need to consider what would happen if HMRC came in and asked to look at a record or a log of what's happened, your policies, procedures, etc. You need to be able to evidence everything you've done. You need to carry out a business-wide risk assessment. Sounds quite harsh. We'll come on to it in a bit more detail later, but it's something you need to do. It doesn't have to be overly complex, but again, you need to sort of keep that up to date and make sure all breaches are reported. And when we talk about breaches, we mean where you have suspicion that money laundering may be taking place. So you have to report that to the National Crime Agency. Again, we'll come on to that in more detail later.
The nominated officer is the person responsible for receiving and assessing internal reports of suspicious activity, but then also deciding whether to escalate them to the NCA, or the National Crime Agency. And that's via a suspicious activity report, often shortened to a SAR. For a larger business, a compliance officer ensures the business complies with all the AML regulations and oversees the implementation of policies and controls. So they need to regularly review and audit to ensure that process is being followed and are still sufficient as new risks and threats emerge. And in terms of your wider staff, so they're involved across the board, and in all property transactions, they must understand and apply AML procedures in their day-to-day work. Every member of the team has a role to play in achieving compliance for your business, and things that they need to be part of and be aware of. So carrying out that customer due diligence checks, recognizing and reporting suspicious activity. So it's not always going to be the money laundering reporting officer that spots these things. It's the people closer to the pulse and seeing things on the ground. So as and where they see these red flags, they see these suspicions, they're responsible for escalating that internally so that the correct actions can be followed. In addition to that, tipping off individuals about ongoing concerns or investigations that are currently taking place, that is an absolute no-go. So must adhere to complete privacy and secrecy for those such events so that you can protect the integrity of the transaction, your client and your business as well. Maintaining accurate records of checks and transactions, this is another key thing that your teams will be part of. And as Simon's already touched on, is the AML training, and that needs to be conducted on a scheduled and regular basis, but also evidenced as well. So if you were under inspection from HMRC, there was you were being audited, that's something they'd expect to see. The training that's happening, who's undertaken such training, what it was about, and the date that it took place as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. So the foundations of compliance, your AML policy, and just to touch back on a few of the things Steve said on the previous slide, actually, is that one of the main questions that gets asked us is, why do estate agents have to conduct these checks? Why is so much onus put on us when conveyancers and lenders in the transaction also have a part to play? Which is completely fair enough. And your job is, you're not a trained money laundering investigator. However, what you do is, in the main, you meet both parties in the transaction. You get a sense of the individuals, you get a sense of the funds, a sense of the reason for moving, etc., and what they do is for a living. So actually you are at the front end, as it were, of the transaction, and therefore you are potentially best placed to sort of eyeball those people and take a view on what's going on. But when you look at the foundations of your compliance and what a policy, which is, along with registering with HMRC, having an AML policy is another essential sort of foundational tenet of what you have to have. And your policy needs to be proportionate to your business. HMRC then expect you to, if you've got a single branch estate agency that deals with a very small local village, they do not actually expect your policy to be 1,000 pages long. It needs to be proportionate to what they're asking and to the size of your business and the kind of transactions you deal with. It needs to be clear on who's responsible for managing the risk. It needs to be reviewed regularly and updated. And I would suggest any time you review or update your policy, maybe on a covering page, you make a note in terms of when you have reviewed it and what you have updated. Just so if someone comes in and says, how seriously are you taking it? You can say, we take it seriously. And look, we reviewed it X number of times in the last few years or few months. And it needs to be a sort of, we say, a recorded document, but held in a place and then is added to regularly. It must, and what must it include? Well, it must include how you assess and manage risk within the business and your clients, who is responsible for overseeing compliance, customer due diligence you carry out. It must describe the customer due diligence in the 3 areas there, simplified, what we call normal and high risk, and ongoing monitoring. These are a few of the things it must include. In addition to the AML policy, your business must also have a business risk assessment. That typically needs to be a separate document from the policy. If you have a policy, in the file, you can have the business risk assessment in the same file, but it needs to be a separate sort of document. And all businesses must develop a risk assessment. And that assessment identifies the risk your business is exposed to and helps design systems to deal with them. What does that mean? So as a business owner, and I'll always use the example of the 1 branch versus 100 branch, your risks are going to be different. Your businesses are different. Your customers and your counterparties are going to be different in terms of the people you deal with. And when we say customers, we mean vendors and buyers. The geographical areas of operation, if you're in a smaller 1 branch versus 100 branch, is going to be different. You're going to cover potentially from a small town to a county, or let's say the southern, northern, eastern half of England or the UK. What types of products and services do you deal with? You have to evaluate the risk based on those natures. And going back to geographical areas as well, Do you deal with many overseas or non-UK resident buyers, sellers, etc.? How do you receive money from them, and how do you receive money from your typical clients? The kind of transactions that you deal with, are they Mr. and Mrs. Smith selling up and moving from one side of the town, extending their mortgage because they've just got a promotion, for instance, and moving to the other side of the town? Or is it an individual who's just, I don't know, sold his cryptocurrency wallet, and is looking to buy £1 million mansion? And we do get instances of this. So what kind of transactions do you typically get exposed to? And then we're looking at PEPs as well. PEP sanctions, we will come on to that in greater detail, but do you deal with many people in that situation? People do use the classic example of, I don't live in central London, therefore I don't deal with PEPs. PEPs are all over the country. Yeah, and you can get UK PEPs and non-UK PEPs. And UK PEPs come with a slightly less of a risk, but even so, they need to be taken as seriously. So do you typically deal with many PEPs or not? So the business risk assessment needs to broadly cover the transactions, the kind of people you deal with, and the kind of transactions that you deal with. Over to customer due diligence. Steve.
Okay, so 3 levels to this. So simplified to begin. So these are low risk organisations posing limited threat of money laundering, terrorist or proliferation financing. These are organisations such as local authorities and banks. So organisations that are already regulated and audited to strict measures, hence posing less of a risk. The more common is the standard due diligence. And this is the majority of buyers and sellers that you're likely to conduct business with, certainly in the residential space. So individuals who are looking to sell or buy property or let in cases of €10,000 monthly rental or higher. So these individuals have been risk assessed already by your firm, and you'll have an outcome for them. And based on that outcome, all the indicators are green. We're positive that this is a standard case. We're happy that there's a standard level of risk applied to this individual, and you can proceed on that basis. And thirdly, we have the enhanced due diligence. So this is where an individual has been identified as carrying a higher risk. This could be a risk assessment that's already been run on the individual to reveal that they are a PEP, as Simon just mentioned a moment ago. Or are they forming part of an unusually high or complex transaction? So the risk assessment is key here because that helps you to identify where each of these 3 stages come in and which one is appropriate to the party that you're transacting with. And once you can understand that and map out how they sit, you can then apply the right level of due diligence to meet the need of that party. A PEP, so politically exposed person, is someone who holds a prominent public position or is closely related to someone who does. This could be a government official, a judge, ambassador, or a senior military officer. PEPs are considered high risk for money laundering because of their influence and access to public funds. Estate agents must apply enhanced due diligence when dealing with PEPs or their close associates. A common question we receive is when dealing with a PEP is quite simply, can I transact with this individual because they're a PEP? So alarm bells are ringing, red flags are there, and that's good because you need that awareness to identify when something is a little bit out of the norm and extra steps are required. But in short, the answer is absolutely yes. You can continue to transact with a PEP, but you must carry out enhanced due diligence before you can proceed. Sanctions are legal restrictions placed on individuals, companies, or countries by governments or international bodies, like the UK government or the UN, to prevent criminal activity such as terrorism, proliferation, or money laundering. Estate agents must screen against sanctions lists. If a client is on a sanctions list, you must not proceed with the transaction and report it immediately to your nominated officer. This is also adjusted in May 2025 with the introduction of the lettings regulations in regards to sanctions. The sanctions also apply there for every lettings case of all values. Money laundering applies to lettings when it's €10,000 or greater, or a single payment of €10,000 is made. That is applicable in the rental space, but regardless of value, sanctions are now a legal requirement for all lettings practices. So if you are dealing with your lettings book, this is a non-negotiable. Sanctions checks need to be run in this space as well.
Thank you, Steve. Now we move on to verification of funds. So these typically fall into two areas. There is the source of the funds and there is proof of funds. Proof of funds could be someone offering you an original bank statement, for instance, or share certificates of shares they've sold recently. And then there is source of funds. And this is slightly harder to pull together. Now, most of your clients, in the way that most of your clients probably won't be PEPs, will have, I would hope, quite standard ways that they are moving from one house to another. And I mentioned a few of them earlier, Mr. and Mrs. Smith moving from a 2-bedroom to a 4-bedroom detached. Maybe one's got a promotion. Maybe they've come into some money through inheritance, or sort of atypical ways that people would move or receive funds or received gift from a parent, for instance. In these areas, ultimately, you need to understand how and why someone is moving. How are they affording it, and where is the money coming from? You might need to ask for supporting documents in this case, and you shouldn't be scared to do that, because it's your job to look at the transaction and be comfortable that that individual hasn't got money from illicit purposes. So you need to assess the legitimacy. And like I said, in most cases, you will know yourself it's a legitimate area people are getting the funds from, but you need to be alert for the red flags. You also need to record and report. When we talk about recording, if it's Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Mr. Smith or Mrs. Smith has got a promotion or they've come into money, jot that down, make note of that in the transaction. But HMRC, should they come and visit your offices, effectively, they're going to ask you for files. They're going to potentially for 10, 20 files recently that you've run through. And they want to open those files and they want to read a story. Mr. Smith comes in with Mrs. Smith and they want to go from this house to that house. This is the AML checks you've run, this is the due diligence you've done, and this is how you have recorded it. If there's a report that needs to happen to the National Crime Agency, this is why you've done it. Then we come to ongoing monitoring. Ongoing monitoring means continuously reviewing a client's activity to ensure it remains consistent with what you know about them. So if you have got a individual who is selling a property, they work in the city, or they work in the local bank, or they work in the local hardware store, does everything stack up? So that goes back to sort of verifying everything so it looks sound in the transaction. Then throughout the transaction, is everything as you would expect it to be? If, for instance, the individual who's working in the city says, oh, actually, I'm purchasing this property, and all of a sudden I'm not going to be the one that is purchasing it anymore, a colleague of mine is going to buy it on my behalf, for instance, that would be a red flag. So effectively, and you will do this naturally, I'm sure, throughout your business. You will be speaking to your clients. You'll be having regular reviews with them in terms of the progress of the sale, etc. Has anything materially changed in that period of time that will make you think, that's a bit strange? Again, if it is, you're monitoring the transaction. You're not consciously looking for red flags because you're not looking to trip people over. But has anything changed from when you first transacted with them? If it has, again, keep your records up to date. And actually then further to that, if it comes to a sufficient point where you think this is just doesn't smell right, something's not right around the transaction, escalate the concern. That might be to your nominated officer or the money laundering reporting officer in the business. So it's just about being across the transaction, being across the individuals you're transacting with, and you'll have a relationship with them. And has anything ultimately changed in that relationship? And then documenting that. Suspicious activity reports. So this is the ultimate sanction you have against money laundering. This is SAR, a suspicious activity report. And it goes back to the sort of ongoing monitoring bit. Why should you go to the National Crime Agency and submit a suspicious activity report? Well, ultimately, something is just not right, like I spoke. Maybe someone is reluctant to provide the details. There's a complex structure, unusual transactions, irregular third-party involvements, lifestyle mismatches, or someone whose lifestyle that you can see just doesn't match the type of transaction that they're conducting. So these may be red flags to say, where is that person getting the money? What is going on behind the scenes to allow them to get the money and further that transaction? And if you have those concerns, like I said earlier, go to your nominated reporting officer, go to your money laundering reporting officer, discuss the situation with them. Their job is then not to put on their private detective's hat and go and follow that person down the road. They take effectively your suspicions at face value. They'll look at it, they'll consider it, and they may choose to take next steps and go to the National Crime Agency. And that is going online, filling in a report online, identifying the concerns in a really concise way. The National Crime Agency do not want to read 3, 4, 5, 6 chapters of what happened in a clear bullet pointed way. You would submit a suspicious activity report. You would ask for a DAML, which is Defence Against Money Laundering, and you certainly do not tip off the person or inform the person who you're making the report against. Typically, within 14 days, the National Crime Agency would have come back to you and give you the next required steps on that transaction. And in some cases, it will be no further steps are required, carry on with the transaction, but you cannot sort of further the transaction over that period of time. What I would say again is the number of suspicious activity reports submitted by estate agents, bearing in mind you see each individual face-to-face in the transaction, is incredibly low. Something like 0.01% of all transactions or all suspicious activity reports are actually sent in by estate agents. So maybe this is an area that agents aren't taking as seriously as they should do. And it's certainly something that HMRC would be looking at if they're looking at your business. Have you made any of these suspicious activity reports? Record keeping. I mentioned it earlier. I'm not going to dive too deep into this because it is what it is. You need to keep records. If HMRC walk in and they want to look at a transaction, they want to know what happened, how's it happened, and why has it happened. So, keep customer contracts and documentation. They need to be on file for at least 5 years. Make sure you retain the customer due diligence. But certainly if you identify someone as a higher risk or a lower risk or a simplified risk, why? Where is your evidence as to that? Suspicious activity reports. Now, you'll be reporting them to the NCA, but make sure if you haven't reported them because actually you didn't feel it needed to go that far, keep a copy of the information that you kept on file that you discussed with your colleagues. And ultimately, this page is all about just keeping the paper trail, as it were, which you will do in your files, and make sure it's in that single space that you can grab that's easy for you. Penalties for non-compliance. We touched on this earlier. Ultimately, estate agents can go to jail who do not comply with the money laundering regulations. That's the ultimate sort of fine. I do not know of any agents who have gone to jail, but unlimited fines can be unleashed on businesses. Now, it would tend to be anywhere. It's all proportionate based on your business and your turnover. So it's not like you're going to get, a smaller agency is going to get £1 million fine, but there have been some incredibly hefty fines that have handed out. And it's all based on the following of the guidelines, the following of the regulations. Do you have a policy? Are you registered with HMRC? Are you conducting your risk assessments on each individual, that's buyer and seller? Is the timing of the due diligence correct? Are you checking for the source and the proof of funds, for instance? All of these areas, are they ticked on each transaction consistently? So you really need to be across the fact that it is serious, and HMRC are taking this seriously, and they are fining estate agents. So you need to take this seriously yourself, be it your business or be it you're working in a business. This is the reason why you may be having those meetings quite regularly about why it is so important and why you have to tick those boxes and follow that paperwork and follow those trainings. So this takes the AML health check, and for this, I'll pass over to my colleague Steve.
So you've set this up really nicely, Simon. Lots of things to be aware of, lots of scary things in there as well. And there is a lot to think about. But we know, working with thousands of agents, that those that apply themselves and take the regulations on board, step by step, break it down, simplify it, it is something you can get on top of and become comfortable and confident with. So to support with that, we have the AML health check. This is a landmark tool that we have available, and this helps agents navigate the confusing and complex road of money laundering. So we have a health score designed for you, so you can scan the QR code to have a look. We can send the link out afterwards as well. But in short, it takes just a couple of minutes to go through and complete. It's an online form, laptop, mobile, tablet friendly, so whichever device you're on, no restriction, and you can do this on the go if needed. It will ask a series of multiple choice questions, so just to get a feel for your current position and your stance towards money laundering and what you have in place today. This looks at things such as HMRC registration, your MLRO, so who's appointed, and are they appointed, your policies and procedures, what you do for staff training, identifying beneficial owners, risk assessments for your buyers, sellers, but also companies, probate and charity cases as well. Your process for identifying politically exposed persons. I felt like we've spoken about PEPs a lot today, but yeah, there's something you can't shake off and always need to be vigilant to. Sanctions, as well as record retention. So this simple survey that you complete in hand, we get the results sent through to Landmark. It's all privately screened between us and yourselves. We'll review the results and we'll provide an evaluation back to you. So it may be that you come up trumps and it's a perfect score and there's no areas of concerns on the sections that we've looked at through the quiz. But on the flip side, we will also look at cases where there are gaps and there's improvement areas that you need to be aware of. And in many cases, it's action that's required as well. So if that's the case, we'll discuss those areas of risk with you, just really highlight the things that you need to be aware of and where action is required, what you can do, so the right steps to counter this and get to a compliant state again, so what those changes look like, what's needed, and then the action plans to put it all together as well. Alongside that, we'll get you steady, back on track, but we can also provide follow-ups and check-ins with you as well, wherever needed and wherever it suits your business. And that way we can get you on the right track now, but equally in months to come down the line, are you still on the right track? Have you veered off? Is there any differences, any changes that you need to be aware of? Hopefully not, because we'll do our best to guide you, keep you on the straight and narrow. But that constant feedback loop is really valuable for our clients and it's really appreciated as well. So have a little scan. That will take you straight through to the risk assessment, to the health check, You'll get to see the results of that and work with us to guide you through to any required steps that need to be followed from here.
So the final slide is, how we can help. Well, Steve's, absolutely outlined how we can help. And the first step for most people we find is when we talk to anyone, it's that they come to us because they think there might be a gap somewhere in what they're doing. So the health check is a great place is where we can start. But ultimately, beyond that, we offer DIY electronic AML checks even. And that includes what we call simple AML, facial recognition, integrated AML, where we can run it via an API, or outsource services for AML, surveys, searches, digital sales, etc. Legal packs, no sell, no fee auction packs. There's a plethora of things that we offer. But actually, the main thing and the main area within our system is the compliance element. The vast majority of the thousands of clients we have use us for. And that's an integrated service with land registry, with your AML checks to easily streamline that journey for you, make it quick, simple, documented, and an easy process to follow with some really simple sort of pass and refer mechanisms in there. So there's no ambiguity as to whether these individuals have passed. But actually beyond the system itself, it's backed up by people. So we offer you full training and support from your dedicated account managers. You'd have a named account manager, direct email, direct telephone number, and a full training suite for you to train your team up as well as part of our service. So as the guidance says, you have to train your team regularly. We say once a year. We have a online system where they get documented, certificated evidence that's happened. And that's via the Landmark Academy. We also offer you, because we talked about AML policies, procedures, templates, we offer you an AML policy as a template for free as well as part of the value add, and risk assessments also wrapped around in there. So there's plenty of places we can help. If it's just someone you want to speak to, we also can help there as well, because we want to help the industry. It's not just about our business. And if you like what you see and you like what we have, brilliant. You can sort of jump and join the thousands of agents who use Landmark, but equally we're there to help. We're there to talk to you, and we're there to be of service to the industry. So thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you very much to Stephen for helping out on the call. And if you've got any questions, our details are on the screen. Please do get in touch, and a recording will be out to you later today.
Thank you.